I see AI technology being very different to a standard SaaS tool. And now with Agentic AI, it just brings lots of different challenges from a security standpoint, from a data protection standpoint.
What's different about an AI incident versus a classic security incident?
AI governance is very much a new discipline. It's a new area for organizations to be concerned about. Who's going to own the rights to information?
The whole collaboration thing is really important to them.
Confidentiality is one of the key challenges, isn't it? And it's how do you provide assurance to clients that if you're going to be using AI, that their data will be kept safe.
Hello and welcome to Confidentially Yours. Today I'm delighted to welcome Ray Orife, who, like me, is based in the UK. And the first thing I'd like to do, Ray, is to find out a bit about you. So tell us how you got to where you are and what you're doing now. So please, tell us a bit. Thanks.
Nice to meet you, Mike. So I head up Evalian's data protection and AI governance practice. Evalian is an information security and data protection consultancy. We specialize in cybersecurity services, data protection, information security, ISO implementation, across that spectrum of services where you want to ensure that your infrastructures are safe and that your personal data is well protected. So that includes penetration testing. We've recently spun up a SOC as well. So we're across that security space.
I always do this. Tell us what a SOC is, because we have a variety of people listening from different places. So they may not know what a SOC is. So it's always best to explain that it's not a woolen garment for your feet.
Yeah, so a SOC is a security operations center, and we all have a number of individuals who are sitting across virtual machines, and they want to ensure that an infrastructure within an organization is well protected. So, for example, if there was any sort of suspicious activity within your network, one of our colleagues would be on hand to identify that issue, but then also look into it and then provide the client with an overview of what the incident is. So say, for example, somebody might work hours from 9 till 5:30 typically, and then if say they logged on at 2:00 in the morning, that would be very suspicious for that
That looks
individual.
a bit suspicious. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. And you can track those sorts of things.
Yeah, and it could be nothing, but then it could be something as well. So having a SOC would enable you to identify issues like that and any sort of suspicious activity within your infrastructure.
Excellent. And so one of the other things I like to ask people is where, and I think I know the answer to this one, is where on the really techie to not at all techie spectrum do you sit? Because I know what you qualified in. So you tell us that, and then we'll kind of get to
I
how we
probably
got
know
here.
it enough to be dangerous and ask the right questions. That's why I always like to say I would say I'm not techie, but I know enough to ensure that, say for example, I'm reviewing a piece of software, or one of my clients, for example, is looking at a SOC service. I would know enough to ensure that from a data protection perspective, or say an AI governance standpoint, that they've got appropriate controls in place.
Yeah.
I can tell when somebody techie is trying to tell me what I want to hear, even though
I know what
it
you
might,
mean.
exactly, yeah. So it might
yeah.
not be the fact that they're going to have appropriate controls in place, but if they
Because
use enough acronyms, they'll think, all right, that also,
get away with that.
yeah.
Fudge the issue a bit. So because you qualified as a solicitor and a UK lawyer, right? So tell us how you got to where you are, because it's not an obvious place necessarily that people might expect to find lawyers. So tell us your background and how you made it to where you are.
Yeah, so I trained at a regional law firm in Newcastle called Ward Hathaway, and you have to, when you're training, you have to do 4 seats. I did 2 in commercial litigation. That was why I wanted to
So seats
qualify.
are learning specialisms, right? So
Yeah,
sorry, okay,
exactly.
just checking.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I did 2 in civil litigation, 1 in corporate, and 1 in property. And in my mind, I wanted to go and do civil litigation. But one of the challenges within law firms, there also has to be a spot available in that team for when
Yep.
you qualify. And there wasn't a spot available. I had other options, but they didn't really suit what I wanted to do. And so I went in-house. It probably was the best decision that I made, to be honest. And so I started practicing commercial law. So I'm a commercial lawyer by trade. So that will be looking at commercial contracts, advising a business on commercial issues that might come up when they're, for example, procuring new services, or it could be something that's happening within the organization. They're looking at new processes. I advise the business from a commercial standpoint, lots of reviewing contracts. And then it must have been, I was working in Newcastle Building Society at the time, so in the financial services sector. And it must have been late 2016, so pre-GDPR, the legal team at MBS, Newcastle Business Society, they were going to be responsible for the implementation of the GDPR project that was going to be happening. And I can remember my boss at the time saying that we need 2 data protection officers. So one for the traditional building societies, so mortgages, savings, but then very interestingly, they had another arm to the business where they provided white labeled financial services. So they had a savings management system and they provided it to other financial institutions. So very unique. You would never know. Similar to the likes of, if you've got a Lloyd's account, I have a Lloyd's and Halifax account, and you'll see that they're part of the same group. So they look very similar when you actually log on to their app.
Sure.
And so MBS, it had this another arm to the business, NSSL, which at the time had 11 or 12 clients where they outsourced their savings management system. So you could be within one of these clients and their system and setup looked very similar to MBS. And so they needed a DPO for that organization as well. So I applied for that role because I was working very closely within that business from the contractual perspective and providing NSSL commercial advice. So it felt like it was going to be a good fit for myself. I knew a lot of the key stakeholders very well. So I applied for that role and I got the job. And so that was how I got into data protection. And then it must have been about 2 years later, once the GDPR was came into force, the DPO for MBS left, and then I became group DPO. So that was
Group
how,
data protection officer.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
I became group DPO. And one of the challenges with data protection is that when you're, especially in a legal team, there's nuances in it which are very different to typical legal matters. So if you say for consent, for example, consent in a legal sense compared to consent from a data protection perspective is very different. So
Okay.
yeah, so consent from a data protection perspective, it has to be clear and unambiguous. Whereas consent generally, I can remember having a conversation with another lawyer around, well, if you're opening, or say, for example, when you're getting a mortgage, often back in the day, I know that a husband could provide consent on behalf of their wife, of their wife. But
Yeah.
now, with GDPR, that wouldn't be sufficient. The wife
Sure.
would have to provide separate consent. So it's issues like that where, especially, although I was in a senior role, I was still relatively junior, and I wanted to get into an environment where there was like-minded people that had similar experience to me, but also that had expertise in data protection. And that was why I moved to Evalian during COVID. So it was September 2020.
Cool. Excellent. And so I guess that there's been no changes in the data landscape, and AI has been completely irrelevant, or has it been?
Ah, no.
So you got into AI, right?
Yeah, so I got into AI. It must have been about 3 years ago now. So when I joined Evalian, I always joke with one of my colleagues because we had our induction at the same time, but I was actually the eighth employee. But I always say to him that I was the seventh employee because we had our induction at the same time, but he actually joined a couple of weeks before me. So that was 2020. And there were four of us, or actually five of us in the data protection team. Two of them were our, our, our directors in the business, and then there was a couple of consultants. And so the business was seven or eight of us. Now we've grown exponentially. There's 80 or so of us in the business now in the past 5 years. And we're obviously very heavily focused on data protection, and we must have only had about 20 clients that we were providing our services to. So our key offering from a data protection standpoint is DPO-as-a-Service, so data protection officers as a service. So we'll typically go in to a new client, carry out a gap analysis, health check, understand what their current data protection posture looks like, and then produce a report, set our key findings and recommendations, and then work through a remediation plan. But alongside that as well, they'll have support hours. So if there's any sort of ad hoc query that comes in, if they want us to review a data processing agreement, we'll review that. And then with that, we've now got 300 odd clients, which we provide our services to on an annuity basis. So when all of this chat around AI was coming in, and the likes of OpenAI on all these different types of tools, Gemini, we identified an opportunity. We've got this existing base of 300 odd clients. Then in the other arms of our business, whether it's from a pen testing standpoint or cyber perspective, there's such a strong nexus between all the disciplines, whether it's information security, data protection, and now AI. There's a huge interplay. So we saw an opportunity to launch this AI governance practice. So we officially launched it last year, but in the meantime, we'd already been getting a lot of questions around AI from clients. So we saw it as a perfect opportunity for the business
So
to
what
grow.
what sort of questions do you get, I guess, is the first question. What do your clients want to know about AI and then?
Yeah, so it depends on the client. We have some clients that build AI tools, but we also
Mhm.
have clients that will use AI or looking to use AI in their supply chain, whether it's using OpenAI, ChatGPT for summarization or to create content from a marketing perspective. Because it's such novel, well, to a lot of organizations, it's very novel technology. So they have reservations, they have concerns, they will come under scrutiny from their clients or customers as they're part of a supply chain. If they, and what we're seeing is with a lot of our clients, their clients are concerned about AI. Some of their clients are saying that absolutely they don't want them to be using AI. And then we've got clients who may view AI as not being different to any other sort of third party tech, as it is effectively a SaaS tool. I don't see it that way, but some of our
Yeah.
clients do see it like
So
that.
there's a breadth, it sounds like, of how people think about it. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm in the camp where I see AI technology being very different to a standard SaaS tool. With a standard SaaS tool, you don't have that level of autonomy which an AI tool can display. And the risks as well with AI are very different. With a standard piece of software, it'll be very structured, and you'll know in terms of if you input something, you know what you get, you know what you're going to get out of it. Whereas
Yeah.
with an AI tool, that's not always the case, and it does, and I would say it's that level of autonomy which AI tools operate at, which makes a big distinction for me.
And regulators have, I think, tried to start getting their head around this in the last year or so. What would you identify as the sort of main changes in governance, UK or globally, over the last, sort of 18 months or so? We're talking in 2026, so I guess that's, through late 24, 25.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess when it comes to governance, especially from a UK EU standpoint, you can't ignore the EU AI Act, and that came into force. It was August last year, and then it's coming into force in tranches. So it came into force in August last year, and then other elements in February this year, and the key provisions, well, they were supposed to come into force in, I believe, 2026, but the EU's digital omnibus is probably going to have an effect on timelines as well. But I would say that the EU AI Act is probably going to be quite significant in what the governance structure looks like globally. In the US, the Trump administration has probably adopted a more laissez-faire, pro-commerce approach. And we're seeing globally say in Canada, Singapore, they do have frameworks more aligned to risk and ethics as well.
Are there any positive, good examples of good AI governance that you'd identify, and particularly if any of them have actually mitigated, prevented any problems that you're aware of, or are we still waiting to see that, would you say?
I would say that from a lot of the clients that we work with, AI governance is very much a new discipline. It's a new area for organizations to be concerned about. And I would say it's very early. We speak with a lot of clients, and normally from a data protection perspective, you'll get a lot of opinions from clients as to how they believe that we should approach certain aspects. And that's not clients telling us what to do. It's more that once you provide your advice, they'll have questions and comments. Whereas now with AI governance, a lot of it's, well, you tell me what I need to do, because there's
Sure.
nothing for them to go off for, and they really don't understand what the risks are. So and I think the challenge as well is that even if we say that these are the risks that are synonymous with generative AI, you now bring agentic AI into the mix, and now there's new risks. So it's moving even at that level where you're looking at Gen AI at one point, now we're looking at agentic AI, and that presents different challenges. So the goalposts are constantly moving. So the governance needs to be constantly moving, which is the challenge at the moment as well.
So, tell us a bit about the differences that you see for the sort of governance end of the spectrum, if agentic AI versus, Gen AI, because I see them from a kind of security point of view, and I suspect that we have rather different perspectives. So I'd love to hear, where it sits from your point of view.
Yeah, so I would say with Gen AI, what I've seen is that a lot of the clients which we work with, and just in general, when you speak to individuals, they were using generative AI for simple tasks, I would say, and where it's summarization, and it might be just fact finding as well.
Yeah.
And
I've certainly seen it. You find out, what's the size of the market here, or where are opportunities in a particular area, those sorts of things. Yeah.
And now with agentic AI, we're seeing that clients are trying to use various agents to create or to support with tasks where there will be quite a number of steps where they'll be using AI agents integrating with different platforms. And it just brings lots of different challenges from a security standpoint, from a data protection standpoint, and even understanding that if there's an issue at one step, what are the compounding issues that are going to arise across that AI deployment? and how do you track them? How do you monitor them? And I would say that that's the challenge with agents, but also just understanding how they work as well. And if there's a misstep in one part of the chain, what will that lead to downstream? I would say is very much the challenge at the moment.
Yeah, and who takes responsibility for that? Who is the appropriate data protection officer? And all those sorts of things. Yeah,
Yeah,
which are not the obvious things you necessarily think about if you're looking from a technical, driven point of view.
yeah.
Okay, so
And just going back to that, Mike, as well, actually, one of the challenges which we see is that we'll work with a client where their IT team is deploying these tools. And yes, they're skilled, but AI is very different. It's very new technology. And I've had conversations where IT professionals are like, we don't really know how this is working. We know what we want it to
yeah,
do. We know what outcome we want from the product. But in terms of how we communicate this to our customers, in terms of how we actually deal with this, if there is an issue, or we don't actually know how we would necessarily fix that because they don't understand intimately how the technology works. So to communicate that to
mm.
customers to ensure transparency is a
To
real challenge.
regulators as well,
Yeah,
I guess. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And the regulators.
Okay. So right. Well, talking about things going wrong, are there any good examples of AI incidents? I mean, and what's different about an AI incident versus a classic security incident? And we touched on some of this stuff, but again, from your point of view, are there any examples you can give? And how would you classify?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key issues with AI that a lot of the people have heard around is around hallucinations. So this is effectively where AI will produce an output which looks accurate, which looks real, but could be absolute garbage. You may have come across the New York lawyer that cited fake cases. Uh, uh,
Yep.
yeah,
And I've had an example of that recently. Actually, I was reviewing a draft protocol description, a cryptographic protocol, and there was a list of references, and one of them happened to be associated with an organization that I know really well, and I thought that doesn't even exist. That document that they're citing doesn't exist at all. And
yeah,
so if it could,
exactly.
so it happens in law world, it happens in the technical world, and yeah, sorry, carry on. That's just
Yeah,
it's
I would
shocked
say that,
me.
yeah, and that's where I've seen the Deloitte. I think it was Deloitte in Australia. They produced a report for the government which was littered with errors as
Oh,
well, and they had to provide a refund. I think it was about 400,000 Australian dollars or so that they had to provide a refund, and I think that the accuracy issue is one of the key problems with AI. And there's a lot of hype around AI replacing humans, but I can't see that happening anytime soon. I think
yeah.
it's definitely can be used and is beneficial for repetitive tasks, but I think where there's an element of complexity, that's where you can't just solely rely on AI. I think there was an incident where McDonald's wanted to use it in their drive-throughs, so this could be something that could be seen as just a simple task of making orders, but again, there was issues there. So I think it highlights that, yes, AI can be very beneficial, but also there are challenges as well when it comes to accuracy, for example.
Because there was another case, I think, in the US where they were looking to possibly do sentencing guidelines based on AI recommendations, and they found that the sentencing suggestions were hugely ethnically skewed because of the data they'd taken it from, and they hadn't realized that it's coming up with stuff which is just inappropriate. So I'm not sure
Yeah.
that's a hallucination, but that's certainly bias coming in,
Yeah,
right?
that would, and this is why laws like the EU AI Act are so important. The risks posed by AI can be really far-reaching.
Hmm.
There's been issues around it being used that I'm aware of in the US for policing and identifying criminals. And if there's not appropriate guardrails in place, if these tools haven't been built taking into account bias and use diverse data sets, and also the bias can be in the data, but it can also be in the individuals that are building these tools. So the teams building these tools also
Well,
need to be diverse as well.
we have seen one of the issues. Be careful about this. One of the major providers of AI saying explicitly that they are going to remove some guardrails because they don't agree with the direction that it's taken. So, and I guess the EU is trying very hard to mitigate against that. Is that how you see the EU trying to understand
Yeah,
it?
yeah, absolutely. The AI Act, it does have stringent obligations for organizations to implement if they're going to be deploying high-risk AI systems. And I think it's imperative that these type of laws do place these types of obligations on organizations for the very reasons which we talked about there. The issues can be extremely far-reaching for individuals. Amazon tried to roll out a recruitment tool a few years ago, and they found that it didn't identify women as stronger candidates as men. And this was
Oh,
based on the fact that the training data was largely based on male candidates that had built these tools. So when
yeah.
they trialed it with women candidates, it didn't recognize them as being appropriate in certain words. For example, I think also the universities which the male candidates had attended, when you now input female candidates, it didn't recognize those universities that they'd been to as being appropriate, so it just rejected them.
Yeah.
So it just shows, and this is a company like Amazon as well, so it just shows that you have to have appropriate controls and guardrails in place. And again, going back to who's building the tools, where's the data coming from, it's really important that there is diversity within these data sets and also within the teams building these tools.
And do you see governance as a good way to try to force accountability back up the chain in terms of who operates, who creates, who trains these models?
Yeah, and I probably wouldn't even use the word force. I think that governance is important to ensure that from an ethical perspective, from a commercial standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, that these risks are mitigated. And so that you can really realize the benefits of using AI. What you don't want to do is invest heavily in a tool and then have to start retrofitting because you haven't identified these issues or dealt with these issues from the outset. So I'd say that governance for me is a strong driver to ensure that your tool will work the way that you want it to and the way that is intended on an ongoing basis. It continues to do so. And if you do that, you'll definitely reap the rewards from a commercial standpoint, from an ethical, and also from a compliance perspective as well.
Okay, thank you. So, Ray, you've said that you're aware that not everyone has a full understanding of how AI works. Arguably, no one really understands how AI works, right? But people are still implementing that, AI tools within their businesses. How are they, given that they don't know, how are people actually using it in their products and their services, in your experience? And are there risks associated with that?
Yeah, I would say absolutely there are risks, and this is why governance is really important. What we've found is that a lot of organizations don't have the expertise in-house to develop these tools. The existing engineering teams and IT teams don't necessarily have the expertise. So they're outsourcing the development to third parties.
And
And
those third parties are completely knowledgeable about all AI things, or
so
not
what I would say
exactly?
is that in terms of utilizing AI and developing a tool to client requirements, that yes, a lot of these
Okay.
organizations are building great tools for their clients from a technical perspective. But when it comes to looking at it from a compliance standpoint and making sure that these tools align to AI legislation and guidance requirements, they don't necessarily have the expertise around that. So we'll be jumping on calls and explaining to engineering teams from third parties that when it comes to monitoring, these are the controls that you have to have in place. When it comes to data collection, these are the issues from a data protection standpoint, for example, that you have to consider. What's the provenance of your data? Do you have a license to actually use the data, or is it going to be a case that you build this tool and then when you now start reviewing it and scrutinizing it from a compliance standpoint, that now issues arise?
And do you think that lack of expertise in the market is because these companies are operating in different sectors, or because the governance rules are unclear, or just that it's new and people haven't got around it yet?
I think it's a bit of all of that, Mike, to be honest. I think that to a lot, as I mentioned, AI is very new to a lot of organizations. It's very novel. And also, when you even look at the AI Act, if you want to look at legislation that's out there, again, it's very new. The key provisions aren't even in place yet. And I think that that's the challenge right now, is that we all work and live in bubbles, don't we? And I think that when it comes to compliance as well, we still work with a lot of organizations that are still just getting to grips with the GDPR. And that's been
Yep.
enforced for coming up to 8 years now. So I expect to see something similar with AI. And I would say that the challenge is it's new. Organizations are still trying to understand what the risks are. And a lot of the risks are unknown to the majority of organizations. Unless you work in this space like I do, and there's new risks that are coming out based on, for example, I mentioned agentic AI, and when you compare it to Gen AI, and I'm sure we're looking at agentic AI in a year or so, there'll be something new that we're looking
Yeah,
at,
yeah.
and because it's moving so quickly, I think again that presents a lot of challenges as well.
And I mean, let's talk about some of those risks, right? So there's the money risk, right? If you're found to be in contravention of some of these regulations, there's big numbers out there. Whether you're a small or a large company, there's reputational risk as well. I right? I guess those are two of the obvious ones that occur to me. Are there other ones that I'm missing?
Yeah, so we touched on accuracy issues, but also even if you're looking at it from a contractual perspective, if you're providing an AI tool from a contractual standpoint, what are you stating in your contracts around accuracy? What are you stating in your contracts around intellectual property? Who's going to own the rights to information? So one of the challenges which we're seeing at the moment is that when clients are engaging third parties, they don't want that third party to use their data to train their
Yeah.
base model. And I totally get that from a confidentiality standpoint, from a proprietary standpoint as well, for proprietary information. They don't want an organization to be using proprietary information, and they don't want that leaked. But if you look at it from the third party standpoint, they want to improve their product on an ongoing basis. They want to keep developing their tool. How can they do that if the data which they're gathering from all these different clients they can't use? So that's one of the challenges which we see at the moment, and how you advise a business to move forward from a compliance governance standpoint as well is becoming increasingly challenging because of that. It's that trade-off between wanting to get the best product, but also wanting to keep your data safe as well.
Yeah, the whole collaboration thing is really important at the moment, and it's something that I'm involved with some of my other work in around confidential computing, which gives you some technical basis to allow you to collaborate, but be able to prove that that data can't leak. And
Mm.
so, the confidential computing and some of the work the Super Protocol is doing, for instance, allow you to do those things, and we need to find ways of doing that. And I tend to think of it just in terms of you know, the business leverage that gives you. But, looking at it from the point of view that you've just provided, is another aspect as well, and something we need to think about, that there is the compliance, there is the accuracy, and knowing that what you're doing has been trained on the right data and is therefore relevant to your business and your use cases is gonna become more and more important.
No, and that's a really good point, Mike. Confidentiality is one of the key challenges, isn't it? And it's how do you provide assurance to clients that if you're going to be using AI, that their data will be kept safe. And that's one of the challenges that we've seen with AI. Clients want to know that when you input information into AI, that it's not going to come out as an output for a totally separate party. And I'd say
Yeah.
that that's one of the challenges right now.
So one of the things you talked about that is people having assurances, right? And there's a phrase that we use in the computing and business world, which I'm aware that lawyers tend to use very, very differently. And I'd love to have your thoughts on how this plays into that. And that is due diligence. Because if you're doing due diligence in the business world, it means you've checked that the people. Let's say you're doing a mergers and acquisition. You check that the officers are in good standing. You're checking that the intellectual property is there. You're checking that the financial statements look decent, right? But if those words and those phrases are appearing in a legal context, as I know they sometimes do, what does that look like with your lawyer's head on? If that makes
Yeah, so
sense.
I would say that due diligence from a lawyer standpoint, from a legal perspective for me, is very much around gaining assurance that the third party that you're going to be using, if we're looking at AI, if we're looking
Yeah.
at personal data, is going to be handling that personal data in accordance with legislation, in accordance with regulator guidance, and in accordance with best practice. So it's going to be looking at contracts, for example. What does the contract with that third party say around how they're going to handle personal data? You want to gain assurance that if you're looking at a data processing agreement, that it's going to be stating, for example, that if they're transferring data to a third party, that they're going to comply with, and it's within the EU, with restricted transfer requirements, that they're going to ensure that there's an IDTA in place, or if it's the EU SECs or UK addendum, for instance. You want, and that's what due diligence looks like for me. Do you need to carry out a data protection impact assessment? You want to gain assurance that that third party effectively is going to comply with the law and going to comply with regulatory guidance. That for me is what due diligence looks like.
Okay, that's really interesting, because one of the things that I'm looking at the moment is how regulators can start consuming technical assurances that a particular system is using some of these protections and these technical and technological measures, things like cryptographic proofs that things are being done correctly, and helping regulators understand that this can actually be an underpinning to these assurances. We have something called remote attestation, which is it's. I mean, again, attestation means something rather different in the legal world, right? But remote attestation, which provides us cryptographic proof, mathematical base, that things have been done in the way that we said they were, and helping regulators build these sorts of things into the systems that they are building, and giving them the legal standing alongside sort of contractual assurances. And in some ways, as a security and techie, I would say higher assurances because you can't get round this. You can always get round a contract or just ignore it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's going to be a growing thing. And where does that sit again in your world?
I would say it's around visibility. And so if you have various standards, it's about, well, how well known are these standards to
Yep.
regulate, for instance? So if you look at the likes of ISO 27001 and SOC 2, these are now the gold standard when it comes to integrating security management systems and making sure that from a cybersecurity standard that you can provide assurance when you're coming under scrutiny. So I think that if
Yep.
you're building any sort of standard like that, then it's about visibility and ensuring that organizations, so third parties, that if they're going to want to engage you, or from a regulatory standpoint, understand what the obligations are within that particular standard and what that standard is built to guard against. And that's what we found with ISO 27001 and SOC 2. If you possess that certification, organizations feel assured that you will provide the right protections when you're handling their information.
Yep.
So that's what I would say.
I have to. I always love getting different views on things. I mean, I've as a techie and a business person, I've always kind of lived on that juncture between the technical and the business. But there's the legal side, and there's the reputational side, there's the marketing side, and having all these different views on these things, I can only help people. Is my view, and that's
Yeah,
one of the reasons I really enjoy having these conversations, because if we don't get visibility of these views, we're never going to be able to understand how the wider world in which we operate, and we have to do so within legal structures and regulatory structures, works. Okay, so let's move on to something a bit different, which is we've talked a lot about AI, but we've generally talked about looking at AI and controlling AI. Um, you can use AI to do some of the other stuff, right? So pen testing, for instance, right? Using AI models to try to, well, I'm going to say not prove, but provide assurances around security. Where do you think AI fits here, and how happy about how happy are you with where we are now and where that might be going?
I think AI can support with a lot of different activities, whether it's from optimizing processes, driving efficiencies. So we've seen that organizations will use it to support with security activities, but more so from my focus is ensuring that if you're going to be implementing an AI tool, and it could be something as simple as a chatbot, what AI specific security testing have you carried out to ensure that there aren't going to be any issues? So, for example, prompt injection, model takeover. And the challenge again at the moment is that, again, because this technology is so novel, there's not necessarily the expertise. Just because somebody is a pen tester doesn't actually mean that they can also carry out AI specific penetration testing.
I
So
had it
again,
the wrong way around. I was talking about using AI to do pen testing, but you're quite
yeah,
right. We need to have new methodologies to be pen testing AI systems, right?
exactly.
That's
Yeah.
where you're going. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the challenge. We've seen that it's very easy, or it can be very easy to just actually take over a bot or get a bot to do something that you wouldn't want it to do. And if you're, for example, deploying an AI chatbot in the customer services environment, you want to ensure that that bot's not going to abuse a customer or say something that you wouldn't want it to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because that's a huge reputational risk. But
Exactly.
it could also be equally, dropping, if it knows information about your company, which some of it should be confidential, it could be dropping those if information out, leaking that to individuals, whether they intentionally go, trying to break it, or unintentionally, I guess.
No, exactly. And again, this is where governance is so important, that if you're going to be building AI tools and deploying them in customer-facing environments, you need to ensure that you have carried out stringent security testing to ensure that these issues won't arise around data leakage, around bots interacting with individuals in a way you wouldn't want them to do. As, say, for example, it's in the you have a bot that is going to be deployed in an environment where children are going to communicate with it. We've seen some issues around this, some serious issues around chatbots and interacting with children. You want to make sure that there's appropriate guardrails in place. So you need to ensure that you're testing these tools properly.
I mean, I was thinking just in a classic, you phone up your insurance company and you talk to a bot, right? In a situation where I was talking to an actual person and they give me uh, insurance details of somebody else rather than me, including maybe some contact details, we'd know what to do with that, right? A data protection officer would know the steps to take to deal with that. But I guess that could easily happen in an AI world. And what do we know what happens in that situation? Does a DPO know what to do?
And again, it's a really good question, Micah. And these are the challenges, and this is why it's important to gather and gain that understanding of how these tools operate, and building new processes around, okay, well, if we identify that something has happened here, what a great example is, a lot of clients will deploy Copilot, Microsoft Copilot,
Yeah.
and we've seen that without testing it properly, it can lead to issues of colleagues gaining access to information that they shouldn't have access to. It could be because of the way that their access control has been set up. It could be around sharing links. So it's making sure that you carry out this testing before deploying. And again, it's because this technology is new. And so when it's being deployed, people think that it's just going to work and replicate the access controls, which on paper it should do. But then this technology also works autonomously as well. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's going to produce results that you wouldn't necessarily
And
expect.
agentic AI is going to make it no easier. It's going to make it more complex. Right? I'm
Exactly.
thinking of an HR system in a company where if you're an HR person, you have different access to a VP who has different access to a legal person who has different access to a salesperson,
Yeah.
and you get some of that mixed up. Suddenly you got the CTO's salary leaking all over to junior engineers, and people get very upset. Not
No,
to
no,
mention, leaking out your patent
no, no,
process,
exactly.
whatever.
And this might all sound very doom and gloom around AI, but for me, it's AI will bring huge benefits, huge benefits. It can save time. It can drive efficiencies. It can give you an opportunity to work in areas which you wouldn't necessarily have been able to get to because of lack of resource. But if you don't have the right controls in place, if you don't have appropriate governance in place, then that's when AI will probably not be beneficial, because you'll just be firefighting all the time. Like, whether it's from a reputational standpoint, because somebody's put out a report which they shouldn't have because they didn't check it properly, or if actually you've used agentic AI and it's messed up one of the steps within a process, and then you're having to rework as well. If you have the appropriate governance place, for example, monitoring is overlaid over your processes, then you can be able to identify issues quickly and mitigate those problems quickly as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think you're right. There are absolutely some really positive things here. But when you're training a person, they get something wrong. You can tell them they've got wrong, and they can fix it. It's not really necessarily that easy in the AI world,
Mm.
and we need to
Yeah,
and the so we need the guardrails to help us with that as well.
yeah,
Um,
no, exactly.
So, one of the things that has grown over the last 10, 15 years is cybersecurity insurance, where, people, if they have leaks, you leak data, whatever, then you're covered as long as you've maybe taken certain steps to try and mitigate. Do you see AI being covered by this? Do you think AI should be covered by this? Do you think that insurance around these things is coming, or has come, or what do you stand? Where do you stand on that?
So it's outside my expertise, but obviously we are working in this space. We always get asked questions around insurance and what it covers and what it doesn't cover. So where we tend to sit is that we'll, well, we'll say to clients, well, these are key things that I would consider. But as I say, it's outside my expertise. But I think that AI definitely has to come into the question. If you're using AI on a large scale, it is going to bring risks. It's going to bring data protection risks. It's going to bring information security risks, so cybersecurity risks. So if this is something that you're seeking cover for, you definitely want to understand if AI will have any implications or any sort of bearing on any sort of premiums that you have, any sort of insurance that you have. I would say that AI should definitely be covered. For me, I think that it should 100% be covered.
Right. As you know, we've never met in person, right? And I am terrified of deepfakes, given how good this stuff's going on. And we've had a good chat, but as we've never met, and I've only ever seen you with against that background, it is entirely possible that you might be a deepfake and that you're not an actual person. So one thing I like to do with my guests is to ask them the question and get them to answer in a way which hopefully will prove to me that that they are an actual person rather than AI generated deepfake. So my question I asked today is, why do some humans like snow and not others?
It's a good question. Well, I live in the Northeast, but I was born in Nigeria, and I hate the cold. So I would say that that would be my answer, because when there's snow, there's cold. I can see snow outside now. Actually, it's been snow. I'm based up in Newcastle. It's been snowing, and I'd say that because it just causes chaos.
Okay, but why do some people like snow then?
I would say probably because they like building snowmen.
Snow persons. I think should
Snow
be a little,
persons, snow
a little.
persons, snow person.
Excellent. Well, I think, that's probably a good enough answer that I'm going to accept that you're human. Thank you very much indeed, Ray. I've had lots of fun, really interesting chat.